Yeah, it was a terrifying experience. I remember applying for a car sales position, and I think in the world of business, we often make fun of car salespeople, and they are often at the butt end of jokes and everything else, probably deeply unfairly. But I remember coming out of the family business, and I remember applying for a car sales job, arrogantly assuming, of course, I would get it.
Mm.
Like I would get it straight away because I got a lot of sales experience. I think I can kind of hold my shit together and I can explain stuff. And they didn't even interview me. They just came back and said, no, thank you. So that was one of those moments where there was lots of lows. I guess I didn't know what low was until that phase of my life, and I think one of the things for me looking back is I probably overstayed. And I think as entrepreneurs, we often overstay our welcome in certain places, assuming that the finish line, the way I look at it is going up a mountain, the finish line is going to be the top of the mountain. But if you think about tectonic plates and they're pushing together and they push the mountains up, think about the mountain being the finish line, the summit. The mountain summit, if you like, keeps getting pushed up. In other words, it keeps moving. So at what point do you actually draw a line in the sand? But it was a terrible time, but I think life leaves clues. And one thing that not many people know about is many years previous to that, I was on a holiday in Canada with my mum and dad. They did a house exchange. Myself and my girlfriend spent some time. And my life is full of random meetings. And if you believe in random, that's fine. If you think there's no such thing as random, that's another perspective. And I remember literally walking down the road to this little golf course, little 9-hole golf course, I think it was, and saying to the guy, can I play? And long story short, he said, well, hang around. I'll see if I can get you sorted out. And I was just about to leave. And this man called Les Hewitt walked straight up to me with a Northern Ireland, Belfast accent and said, I hear you're looking for a game of golf. And I'm looking at him thinking, that's not what I expected. Anyway, we're on the golf course an hour later, and I said, what do you do? He said, I just have written a book called The Power of Focus with a Jack Canfield from Chicken Soup for the Soul. So my first thought is, he's a cult leader. What is the power of focus? That sounds like some sort of religious cult. I don't want anything to do with it. And immediately I shut down in my typical, with respect, Irish cynical way, because I think the Irish are a little bit more closed than perhaps, certainly then, than we are now. And anyway, long story short, when I left Java Republic, after falling kind of to that depth in terms of feeling I was worthless, I reached out to him and he said, I was living in Ennis in County Clare, and he said, I said, did you ever get that coaching program off the ground in Europe? And he says, well, actually I did. There's a guy called Tommy and he's running it. And he's in some place called Ennis. And I said, Ennis? And he goes, yeah.
Across the road.
That's just down the road from me.
Yeah.
Like as in down the hill. The following night, I had a pint with a guy, and that sent me off on this, call it coaching journey. And that was the beginning of that. So when your life leaves clues, if you're prepared to look back and see the signposts, and I obviously was interested in helping people, I just didn't think I was going to be able to do it. But it was always in my DNA, always in my blood.
It's been a wonderful journey, it seems. And I think my perspective on it is that life is leaving clues for all of us all of the time. Mostly we choose to ignore them. And when you ignore them, those soft whispers become screams and they become traumas and tragedies if we ignore them. And my suspicion is that most people just ignore life's little messages.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I'm going to share something now that I've only shared once on a podcast interview, and that was very recently. And I've known about this for quite some time. But there was one of my cousins, first cousin, not my cousin. My cousin's first cousin in America was home many years ago, and she said, "So, did you?" She walked into the room. She hadn't seen me since I was a kid. She said, "So, did you make it?" And I went, "Excuse me?" She goes, "Did you make it?" And I said, "Make it like how?" She said, "A priest. Did you become a priest?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "When you were young, I remember asking you what you wanted to be when you grew up. And you looked at me without any hesitation." Now, I have no recollection of this whatsoever. Obviously, I've just blocked it out of my mind. And you looked at me straight in the eyes and you said, "I'm going to be a priest." And I'm thinking, no, that's bullshit. There's no way. That was my other brother. That was my cousin. That was somebody. That was not me. She goes, "Philip McKernan, it was 100% you." And when I connect with that, and I don't share that maybe for obvious reasons, but I think to myself, the last thing in the world I was destined to be was a priest. But what was it? Was it the ego about standing on top of the church and speaking to people? Was it helping people? I think it was a combination of things. But I think ultimately at that point in my life, I saw the priest as somebody who was helping people in the community. So really, when you talk to my mother and you explain what I do, she has no idea what you're talking about. But if you just humanize it and you get rid of the labels like coach and speaker, Philip is a brilliant listener. That's what people would say about me. He's a brilliant listener. He listens so deeply, and then he helps feed back to people, ask them the right questions, support them where needed, and then challenge them when they're not expecting it to get the best out of them. She'd go, sure, Jesus, he'd been doing that all his life. And I have been doing that all my life. I feel that the things we do so organically and so intuitively, we don't put a value on them. We go, if I want to create value in the world, I got to go and find something that I don't know about myself that has value, inherent value in the world. We tend to, in that pursuit, bypass the simple things that we've always been doing in the pursuit of finding something that the world may or may not even want in the first place. The world wants what you do, and the world wants you. That's it. But how do you discover and how do you rediscover and reconnect with those simple things that we do just so intuitively? And that essentially has been my journey. Kicking and screaming. I'll finish here. I was dragged kicking and screaming to the thing that I now do, and I will spend the rest of my life doing.
And so there's lots to unpack there. But it strikes me why I said the world needs Philip McKernan is because people don't talk about this idea that it is innate in you. What you get to bring to the world is innate in you. It's already there. It's not something magnificent you have to find or create. It's a question about looking inside. I have this notion, and the image I've used at times is that when speaking to people, that you're standing in the middle of a football stadium as a small child, and you have all these ideas of what you want to do. In your case, become a priest. But there's 80,000 people screaming at you, which is your parents, your teachers, your siblings, TV, Twitter, everyone, gurus, and they're all telling you what you should be, what you should think, what you should believe. And we approve, like, love you, befriend you because of all of these things. And these voices are screaming at you, and somehow we have to listen to our own voice. And I think that's extremely difficult. Or maybe it's just we forget how. Does that analogy make sense to you?
It does make sense. Absolutely. In fact, during the Celtic Tiger, I remember in amongst all of the applause and all of the gratitude and wild celebrations around how great the juggernaut of the Celtic Tiger was, I remember becoming increasingly more just disenchanted by the whole thing. I just didn't like what I saw. And the feeling I had, this sounds very much like a victim feeling, and that's probably what it was at the time. The victim part of me felt I was standing on a train track. I was witnessing millions of people standing on a train track, or tons of people on a train track. I could hear the train coming, but no one else could. And again, it's not to say that I'm the only one that can see shit. That's not what I'm implying, but I was the only one willing to stop and actually question it. And the train was coming. And what I was watching is this group of men and women partying and living it up and spending and everything else, and slowly allowing themselves to be eroded away from the essence of who they are and what they believed and what they stood for and their values. And I was one of them in many ways. So I was on the track and watching it at the same time. But if I go further back in my own journey, I got a lot of, I think, there's different types of voices. You can get people who have huge expectations on you and say, you're going to be amazing. You're going to amount to something. You're going to take on the world. And that can be both received in a very positive light, and it can be received with a sense of burdensome, which I've received. And then there's another type of voice, which is the voice of cruelty to some extent. And teachers telling me I was stupid and I was going to amount to nothing. And I unfortunately chose to listen to a lot of those voices in the earlier stages of my life. And then there's the ambivalent voices, the voices that don't say anything. And you're left wondering and then creating your own shit about what you think that person thinks of you or not. So I think the most important relationship, let's leave religion aside because I don't want to offend people. I think the most important relationship to cultivate on earth is the one that we have with ourselves. And if you told me that 20, 30 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, Paul, I would have said, you and Les Hewitt are both in a cult. because I didn't understand it and I didn't want to understand it. But I think there's a place to have a very healthy sense of self, to understand and to know and to be in the world. And when you cultivate that, you start to put a value on yourself. Therefore, you put a value on your voice. And therefore, the voices of all of these people telling you what they think you should and should not do, even if their intention is pure, but a lot of them are connected to the outcome. They want the best for you.
They want their version
but
of what they think.
Connected.
Yeah.
They want their version of you. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I often say at seminars or workshops, raise your hands if you have a family who wants you to be happy. And most people will raise their hands. And I'll say, keep your hand raised if they're okay with you changing in order to be happy. And it's a very different dynamic. So I think our families want us to be happy as long as we don't rock the boat and change too much. And I was always the black sheep in my own way. I was always the whistleblower. I was always the guy that would call shit out. It doesn't mean I was always right. But as I've cultivated that voice inside of me, I've relied less on the external voices to tell me what is right and what is wrong, where north and where south is.
And I think also the more you practice that, the more you listen to that inner voice, the clearer it becomes, the less you listen to external voices, but also it proves itself. It proves it worth to you, because when you follow that inner voice, I remember, I was part of the Celtic Tiger as well. I was loving it. I thought it was great. And I remember coming very close to buying a new premises for our building, worth about €5 million at the time. I came that close to it. And thankfully, the day close before the deal signing, being in an office with two people, one of them being my auditor, having a conversation about this, and both of them older, and I respected both of them, going, absolutely, you can afford this, the company can afford this, go and do it. But I remember a voice in my mind when they're both saying, yes, you can do this. I remember a voice going, but Paul, you're the guy that's going to have to pay for it. For people who think it's a great idea are not going to have to foot the bill and pay the mortgage. But we'd pretty much signed to do the deal. And I drove home that evening, and I live in Wicklow. Drove home that evening. It was a summer's evening. And as I drove in my driveway, and my gate slowly opened. And as my gate slowly opened, I can just about see out to the ocean. It was a beautiful day. So it was a beautiful view. I remember driving through the gates and thinking, I live in a beautiful home. I drive a nice car. Fortunately, I have a beautiful family. I have a wife I love. I have 3 wonderful sons. We have a great life together. And I just thought, what more is it? Like, what is it I'm getting out of this that I don't already have? Or maybe I should rephrase that. What am I getting that's of value that I don't already have? Do you want a bigger house? No, this is beautiful. Do you want a bigger car? And I go, no, you have everything that's of value. And I thought the only people who will benefit from this are maybe the banks. Now, the reality is, this is 2008. Had I made that choice, I would have gone out of business within a couple of years. Property market would have crashed. I literally would have lost everything. And I've told the story. It's a long time since I've told it, but I would have started on many occasions. And people, oh, you were so clued in, Paul. You were clued into what was coming. I was clueless. I had no idea property. I had no idea, 2009 or whatever. No idea it was going to crash. But I was going to say a voice inside my heart, in my head, but I corrected a voice inside. Something inside me said, Paul, this is not for you. And the next day I went in and said, guys, I've decided I'm out of this deal. I'm not doing it. Upset a lot of people, c'est la vie. They get over it. I get over it. And then not long after that, the crash came. And I entered into the crash with a business that had 2 premises that we owned and owed the banks 0, which was survival. So when something like that happens to you, you go, listening to that voice saved my life. Maybe I should pay attention a little more often.
Yeah. Well, I think the person who said you were clued in was 100% correct.
Yes,
and incorrect at the same time. You may not have been clued into the markets and what was going to happen. And I don't think anybody really knew. And when you've got 7,000 economists telling you that it's going to end and it's going to end badly, someone's going to get it right at some particular time in history. Not to say economists are all wrong, but I think, not many people predicted the severity of what we said. But the person who said you were clued in was also extremely right, that you were clued in to that kind of internal compass, that guidance, which a lot of people roll their eyes to and think is fluff, particularly in business. And I call bullshit on that. And there's lots of science and incredible examples and stories of this. And I can cite many stories to validate this, but I'll share one a personal experience. I'm in a room with a group of entrepreneurs. I'm running a workshop. And my work tends to navigate, when I work with, say, for example, athletes, it's everything off the field. Like I work with soccer players at a extremely high level. And I work with them in anything off the field is my business. Because if they're struggling with a relationship, they're struggling with their relationship to money, they're struggling with something, addiction or whatever it happens to be, that's going to affect their ability to perform when they're on the pitch, clearly. So I remember in this workshop one day, so a lot of personal stuff comes into my work. So if I can help the entrepreneur on the personal journey, I have no doubt that they will, have no problems navigating a lot of the business journeys that a lot of them are on. And I opened up by saying, well, what brings you here? And this lady kind of threw her hand up and said, I'm here because, I've gone through a tremendous upheaval in my personal life. My husband cheated on me. He devastated, he broke my heart. And as she's speaking, I'm seeing everyone kind of almost subtly nod in agreement. And I'm thinking, they all know this story, but none of them know each other. These were all independent entrepreneurs. And lo and behold, she'd gotten to everybody before it started and told her the story. And she seemed overly enthusiastic to share, which is always interesting to me. And finally, she stopped rambling on about this story. And I don't mean to sound, ruthless around it or lacking in compassion, but I was when I see a pattern that's not serving somebody. And I finally said to her, did you see it coming? And she was outraged by the question and even the thought. She goes, of course not. And I said, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to call bullshit because I think you're way too smart and way too intuitive not to have seen or sensed something. And she started to, now most people would not notice this. It was more of a feeling that I was picking up. But she started to very gently vibrate with pure absolute anger. And it was directed at me. The audacity to even suggest or even question this story that, by the way, she had the story so dialed in.
It sounded well rehearsed.
Story to keep her stuck. Oh, it was brilliant. It was kind of watertight until it came to me, because I'm pretty good at navigating those. And I said, how are you feeling right now? She's fine. And I said, well, I'm picking up a little bit of anger. That's not true. I was picking up a tremendous amount. And I suspect it's probably aimed at me. And by the way, I'm absolutely happy to apologize and retract and to say I'm wrong. But if you just don't mind, if you could just go beyond the anger, I'm just curious what you're feeling. And she dropped her head, and I didn't know what was going to come next. And as she lifted her head out from behind her hands, the mascara was pouring down her face. At this point, pretty much everyone in the room is looking at me going, you're some kind of an asshole. Like, we've just started and you're having to go with this lady, which of course is not my intention. And she said, I knew it the day I met him. Wow. And I knew it the day I walked down the aisle. And why that is such a powerful example is that if we are not aware of our part in narratives that don't serve us, that's why history continues to repeat itself. Change without awareness is simply change. Change with awareness is called growth. And when she truly owned her part in this, she could then stop telling the victim story. She could stop blaming this man who, by the way, just so we're super clear, what he did was clearly wrong. It was a sense of betrayal. It hurt her. I get it. But she was walking around the world and using that story to hold herself back, and therefore not opening her heart, not trusting men again, staying lonely and keeping herself an island. And the minute she realized that story, her life shifted.